It's time for us to face the harsh truth. The war in Ukraine cannot be won. It cannot be won. It doesn't matter how long we wait, how many more tanks we give, how many F-16s we provide, long-range missiles, how much money. None of it is going to make any difference. The war cannot be militarily won. The longer we delay acknowledging patent truth on the ground, the more Ukrainian men we are going to condemn to death, pointless deaths, and the greater the chance that we perversely play into the hands of Vladimir Putin and potentially allow him to gain more territory in Ukraine. If you're for the Ukrainian side, if you hate Russia, if you hate Putin, then you need to be the first one in line to acknowledge that we gave the war every chance that it could have, but it's just not going to succeed. And we need to stop this before it moves any further to the west, this front line. Now, you may say, okay, that's your opinion, that the war's not going good. There's plenty of other opinions out there that say different things. Fair enough. That is what a lot of people say. But I'm going to tell you some things. I'm going to show you some things that prove almost absolutely conclusively that the war cannot be won and that it has not won. Now, the United States spent over $113 billion from the start of the war, especially all through 2022. Everything was focused on getting Ukraine side ready for a big, grand offensive in the spring and summer of this year to drive Russia out of its territories. President Zelensky was beating the drums for this all over the world. He addressed a joint session of the U.S. Congress. He addressed Parliament in Britain, all kinds of parliaments all over the world. U.S. generals were going on the television news saying that, yes, they're going to succeed at this. And everyone was ready to give them a chance. And we did. We sent over 5,000 military vehicles to Ukraine of various kinds. We're talking top of the line stuff like M1 Abrams, M109, self-propelled Paladin howitzers, 155 millimeter towed howitzers, Bradley fighting vehicles, Stryker fighting vehicles, MRAPs, Humvees, supply trucks, you name it, all over the place. Many, many things we provided. Patriot air defense systems, thousands, tens of thousands of anti-tank missiles, anti-air missiles. I mean, 2 million artillery shells. All these things we passed along to prepare Ukraine for this. We gave them NATO training, months of it at our best training facilities in Europe. We gave them intelligence support. We gave them targeting support. We did everything in the world you could to prepare someone under those arduous conditions for combat. Now, let me put something up on the map here. After all that stuff that we've done, this is on the left here. You see a snapshot from November of 2022, almost exactly 1 year ago. This is from the Institute for the Study of War, probably the gold standard of being able to say where the front lines are. Now, if I took the dates off of those on the top, you could not tell the difference between where the lines of contact were 1 year ago and where they are right now. That is as graphic as it can get. Now, let me pull up a little closer. Let's give you a closer look of that. And you can see even more clearly, other than that blue area on the left side there, which is the area that Ukraine recaptured from Russia, from November 22nd until today, it is virtually unchanged. Let that sink in for a minute. A full year of war, 5,000 U.S. armored vehicles, all of the billions and billions of dollars, and that's on top of whatever Europe did. All those things were done. Every bit of support we could give, and it did not dent the lines. Let that sink in for a second. It did not dent the lines. So everything that we have done has not changed it. Now, upon what basis would anyone think that we're going to change it in the future? Right now, Congress is looking to expand, to come up with another funding bill for Ukraine. It didn't get in the continuing resolutions that have already taken place here, but they keep saying they're going to do some more. But even if Biden got everything he asked for, which is pretty unlikely in this case, it's only going to be $60 billion, basically half of what we had given them in the past. There aren't 5,000 more armored vehicles or military vehicles for us to give them. There are no more extra tanks from Germany to give, from Challenger tanks from Britain, or even Soviet era stuff from others in Central and Eastern Europe. Those things aren't there anymore. There's nothing else to put on there. So the idea that at this point forward or into 2024 that somehow Ukraine is going to win then when they could now, even though that is exactly what Zelensky is saying and what he's asking for. It is irrational to the highest degree to suggest that the conditions on the ground will change. Now, listen, I partly get it. I understand why people are confused on this point, why they say, oh, no, I think that we can win, because I know I heard some generals on the TV and other experts say that we're going to win. And I get that. In fact, let me just show you just a few of those. First of all, here's an Admiral William McRaven from shortly after the war started in March of 2022.
The urban environment is going to favor the Ukrainians because, they know the alleyways, they know the buildings, they know the streets. You'll be channeling conventional forces. And at the end of the day, the question for the Russians is, can they sustain the morale of the troops? Can they sustain the willpower of the Russian people in order to continue this fight? That remains to be seen. And I would say right now, the longer this fight goes, the better chance the Ukrainians have of winning it.
Okay. So, wow, the longer this goes, the better chance. So keep giving stuff. And man, did we ever do that? We continued to give them all kinds of capabilities throughout the rest of 2022. Well, into January of that year, you had former 3-star general Ben Hodges go on. And now this is a guy who was the commander of all U.S. Army forces in Europe. So not just some fringe person. This is a guy who had the highest rank and the highest position for the entire United States ground forces in Europe during his active duty tours. Here's what he said in January.
Are there bright lights on the horizon for Ukraine, that there could be some kind of decisive victory? Or is it really a prospect of many, many months, if not years, of kind of attrition and stalemate?
I believe that Ukraine is going to liberate Crimea by the end of August, so the end of this summer. And I say that because we know that from history that war is a test of will and it's a test of logistics. Clearly, Ukrainian soldiers and the Ukrainian people have the superior will. The logistical situation for Ukraine gets a little bit better each week, whereas the Russian logistics system is frail.
Okay. That's what he said before this offensive. So he was thinking about all these things we had given them, all this intelligence support. They're going to be in Crimea. Look, you saw that original map that we had up there. Crimea was way at the bottom. They would have to go through almost 100 kilometers of territory to get to down on the coastline there, where you see the Mariupol there in the about the center of the map there. A little bit further to the south there is where the original objective was. So they'd have to go through all of that, go through Kherson, and then get into Crimea, which is on the bottom of the map. So that's what he was saying before this offensive. Now, right before this offensive started, you had a very confident David Petraeus go on the BBC and say this.
General Petraeus is very interesting because, A, he's a former military commander, so he knows about offences, but also he's plugged in here. He saw President Zelensky yesterday. And in my interview, what struck me was just his sheer confidence about not just the coming Ukrainian offensive, but also his very bleak assessment of Russia's fighting capability.
The Russian winter offensive has failed to achieve its objectives. Yes, it took one piece of that, Bakhmut, but as the Ukrainian leaders have described to us over the last several days, that was an incredible mousetrap for the Russians. And by the Russians' own admissions, Prigozhin and others, they lost tens of thousands of soldiers, many more that were wounded there, and they failed to achieve the greater objectives.
Now, if you had watched the rest of that interview there, and I wish we had time to show you all of it, Petraeus also expressly said, and you can actually see this in one of our previous deep dives where we did put that video up on there. He said, man, the Ukraine side has now trained in combined arms warfare. They have the tanks, they have the armored personnel carriers, they have the artillery support, they have the intelligence support, and they've been trained by the West, and they're going to go up into this brittle Russian defense, which I think could actually crumble. They could actually crumble, and yes, they could. The Ukraine side could go all the way to the coast. Now, if you've been watching our channel for any time, you know that one other thing he said there was also nonsense. He said, yeah, this Bakhmut, the fight, which was earlier this year, was a mousetrap for the Russians. It was the opposite. Ukraine should have given that thing over in December of last year, at the very latest, January of this year. Instead, they chose to continue to fight a losing battle because they just didn't want to lose. So instead, they ended up sacrificing tens of thousands of what should have been troops for the offensive, which was launched on June the 4th or June the 6th. They didn't have those there because they took a bad choice. So what Petraeus is telling you was actually an example of something successful, helped lay the groundwork for the absolute disaster because the spring summer offensive did not accomplish anything. It just scratched the surface in a couple of areas, and now is blatantly obvious, as you heard the General Zaluzhny, the Ukrainian commander, admitted in an Economist magazine just a couple of weeks ago that the offensive did not succeed and there's not going to be a breakthrough. They finally admitted that, and of course now they want more stuff. Now you say, okay, well maybe they should get more stuff. Let me put that map back up on there one more time. Gary, bring that, the one with the close-up on it. Let's just look at that one more time. Nothing has changed in a year. There is no rational point upon which you can base the hope that something turns around here now, notwithstanding all these generals, notwithstanding the desire of Zaluzhny. Because look, there's something else that you have to take a consideration too, and that is the cost to the Ukrainian people. Now, of course, we know about the civilians who have been killed in the war, and we know about many of these cities that have been absolutely destroyed, wiped off the map. Bakhmut and several others. Marinka has been turned into a moonscape. There's almost not even a wall left in that city, and there's several others that are in danger of falling into that right now. All along the line of contact, even though the line hasn't changed, the body count has gone through the roof. And yes, both sides are suffering egregiously, but the Ukraine side is suffering worse, and they cannot afford to lose anymore because, and here's one of the crucial points of this whole video that I want to make, Ukraine has a desperate need to have the manpower pool to have post-war hope. Once this war is over, by whatever means, they're going to need a generation of men to carry it on into the forward. Now, already, as there are cemeteries have popped up all over this country. Gary, if you could bring that one up there, I want to just show you just a couple of heart-rending scenes from some of these cemeteries. Folks, these kind of things are all over their country. This is not uncommon. There are whole places where you see this is not really an actual cemetery. It's just a field. It's just like that's where they had it. It's because the actual military cemeteries were overcrowded and swamped months and months ago. And these kind of things are routine. The trauma that has been levied on these people is just impossible to calculate here. We touched on it just a little bit in a deep dive with combat veteran Matthew Ho, I believe just a day or so ago when he explained this.
Average age for the Ukrainian army is over 40. And so that means that their young men have been slaughtered. They've lost a generation, and many of them have been killed, but casualty rates of 3 to 4 times higher than what your death rate is. So for all those tens and tens of thousands of dead Ukrainian soldiers, maybe more, I don't know, more than 100,000, 200, no one knows. Yeah, but you then have to understand, right? Say it's 100,000 just to keep it easy. Well, then you're talking about most likely what? Wounded rates of 300,000, 400,000.
That's maybe just the physical wounds. I mean, just, your TBI and some other stuff. It's almost hard to imagine any of them not having some kind of trouble with TBI or PTSD. Folks, we have to acknowledge the painful reality. Look, I understand you hate Russia. Many people hate Russia. Putin is an evil person. He invaded Ukraine. Our justice system says no. Our hearts say no. That cannot stand. And that sounds good on the surface. It's reasonable that anyone would want that in the West, especially everyone in Ukraine. But there is also reality that must be dealt with. We're not doing Ukraine any favors by ignoring the reality and clinging in desperation and in false desperation to a hope that we can attain the outcome that we desire. The longer we ignore patent ground truth reality, 21 months of combat experience where all of these things that many people have been saying is not sustainable, that the fundamentals were never there. And this is the logical outcome. And it's going to be the logical outcome now more than ever. Now, what sense does it make for us to turn a blind eye to that and say, yeah, we're just going to continue to go on because maybe next year it'll be different? Well, I'll be honest with you. That's easy for us to say from Washington, D.C., or from the safety of your confines here anywhere in America. And these people on the front lines, these men who are being pulled from all over Ukraine, knowing these images of the casualties that have been put out there, knowing these cemeteries that their flags are flying everywhere. They know that the chances of them dying are very high. And it's now starting to dawn on them that it's pointless to keep trying, but many of them do anyway. And partially, I can understand this. Maybe you can too. Look, you don't want this to stand. You don't want this invasion of your country to stand. You want to repel it. And so many people in Ukraine say, I don't care what the odds are. I'm going to keep fighting. We owe it to those people who are not emotionally involved to say, I get it. I understand your angst and your emotion and hatred, but we're not going to enable that any further. We're not going to give you the means to continue fighting and dying when we know that that's not going to be enough to win the war, because Russia has way too many people. They have way too much capacity and they have way too much time. I mean, their population's 5-6 times greater than that of Ukraine, and their industrial capacity is orders of magnitude higher. Ukraine is mostly destroyed, and it's about to get worse. I believe there's probably going to be another onslaught of Russia against their energy infrastructure as we get into winter, when the temperatures really start falling, and then it's going to be even more poignant. What we need to do is, before one more dollar is allocated for Ukraine, there's going to have to be some strings on it, and it's going to have to be grit your teeth. There's going to have to be a negotiated settlement. We're not going to continue to give you another 5,000 pieces of our combat gear and millions more of the shells that's going to weaken our own national security. We've talked about that before. But it's time now to have the painful decisions and need to see the leadership out of Washington. And I know we often say that the Washington leadership is devoid of any leadership, and they're weak and all these kinds of things. And there's some justification for that. But when President Biden took us out of Afghanistan, it was an incredibly difficult political decision to make. No president had made it before. Then they just kicked the can down the road, and we saw how pointless that was. And yes, we can argue that it was done very badly. I did argue that, and it was done horrifically. Could have been done much better. Let's learn from that mistake. Let's make sure that this one does get done better. Let's don't just say, all right, we're going to cut off the money tomorrow and there's not going to be any more. Good luck to you. Let's don't do that, because that would be catastrophic. But let's say all the future defensive support, we're going to give you ability to defend your lines, what you have, with the expectation and the understanding that it's only going to be defensive arms, and with the caveat that you have to seek a negotiated settlement on the best terms you can get. Because here's the thing, folks. I don't want to hear any of this mess and nonsense that, oh, you're just talking about capitulation. I'm talking about reality. I'm talking about saving the lives of the Ukrainian people, saving the Ukrainian state. Because if you make a negotiated settlement right now, you've got a chance to actually solidify those lines and not lose any more territory and maintain the political independence and freedom of Ukraine, of Kiev, to continue having the opportunity for bilateral support and relations with all of Europe, with the United States. All of those things continue on. You can continue to build up your defenses, build up along that line so that you're safe into the future. And if they want to make any kind of independent security arrangements with other states in the region, good. That's what they should do. They should work on those kinds of things. It's not something the United States can do, and we'll talk about that later. But what we need to do is help Ukraine acknowledge the harsh, unpleasant, ugly truth of what exists on the ground here and keep them a viable state. Because I'm here to tell you, and I pray to God we don't have to play this video in the future to show that it works out this way. If we ignore reality, if we continue to blindly say, no, just a little bit more stuff, the F-16s, when those hit the ground, none of that's going to matter. But if we do, if that happens, then the likelihood goes way up that Russia will gain more territory, that the Ukrainian army may break in some places because they just don't have enough capacity. And Russia's armed forces continue to grow. Their capacity continues to grow. And in time, they could even take more territory. They already are making some movements in the north, and there's some signs that they may be trying to move further in the south. And who knows, by the end of the winter, they may launch another offensive. Who knows? I can't say for sure what they're going to do, but I know that the risk is high that they'll lose even more territory. But what I can say for guaranteed certain is that they're going to continue to lose people. They're going to continue to throw men at that front line, and they're just going to continue to die in large numbers. And Ukraine needs those men to rebuild its future. It's time to start saying, this didn't work. Let's look to the future. Let's do something that has a chance to succeed. For the people of Ukraine, if we care about them, if we care about solidifying the barrier basically between Russia and the West, this is what we need to do. Don't let those Ukrainian people who have fought so bravely, who have fought so courageously and so hard and exceeded so many expectations, let's not let them eventually stumble because we don't want to face reality. Gary, I don't want to play the jingle at the end of this. If you could just let's close out by putting that cemetery scene back up there one more time. It just doesn't feel right to play the jingle song at the end, but we'll see you on the next episode of Deep Dive.